Thank you, Olivia, for that really warm and welcoming address. I'd like to start out by thanking the Chautauqua Institution, the African American Heritage House Program Committee, and the organizers. I'd like to thank Errol Davis for his great work, Edward Jones for facilitating my invitation, and Olivia Hill for all the great work that she's doing and continues to do. And also, thank you very much for coming out to listen to me this afternoon. Give yourselves a round of applause. I bring greetings also from Howard University, located in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And as I was having dinner yesterday, someone mentioned that I might say a few words about Howard University and its special place in our mission and our world. Howard is an HBCU, which is a historically Black college and university founded in 1867 when Black Americans were excluded from attending other institutions of higher education, but it does not preclude via mission or vision others from attending. Howard is composed of 14 schools and colleges, including a College of Medicine, Dentistry, Howard Law, which we have a Howard Law graduate here. Wonderful to see her, fellow Bison, famous for its work for Brown v. Board, Thurgood Marshall, programs in nanotechnology, genomics, education, and human development. We have Howard University Hospital, which helps train doctors and dentists and health professionals. Highest ranked HBCU for Rhodes Scholars to Oxford. Howard has more than 12,000 undergraduate and graduate students and students from around the world. We have a very diverse faculty as well as student body, even though it is predominantly Black Americans. So there's your introduction to Howard University. Feel free to come and visit us. And I'm very proud of that institution. I've been there a while, and very much so the work that I've done there really informs, as well as my background, informs what I'm going to talk to you today about. I also want to say that it's your 150th anniversary at the Chautauqua Institution. What a pleasure it is to be here speaking during that time. Also, the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer. And also today, July 17th, is also the 4th anniversary of the death of Congressman John Lewis for his life's work, voting rights, and his advocacy of good trouble. I was waiting for you to say that back to me. I'm going to start off with who I am and how I got here. I spoke a little bit about this at the reception, but it really does inform. My work is wide and varied, but it's very much connected through some really unifying strands. I've focused my PhDs in human development, and my work on sustainable development is grounded in the principle of justice and a people-centered human development. And therefore, I've caused a bit of good trouble in some of the places I've been and places that I've spoken. To better introduce my topic of sustainable development in the future, I'd like to introduce my perspective, how it developed through my eclectic strands of interest, research, and travels. I have focused on human development in various ways around the world. I've studied for my doctorate in Cuba and Ghana, West Africa. I worked on a teacher licensing system with the UNDP and Ministries of Education in Ethiopia. I trained refugee teachers near the borders of Somalia in some of the largest refugee camps there with the United Nations Commission on Refugees. Had to abort a trip early due to some extremist groups in the region. I helped develop radio-centered curriculum that teachers could use for disaffected communities during the Ebola crisis. As was mentioned earlier, I served as a Fulbright Scholar in southern India, keynote speaker at the Dhaka University in Bangladesh, in collaboration with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Vienna, helped to develop some tools surrounding the prevention of violent extremism among at-risk youth. Now, in my faculty role at Howard University and co-chair of UN SDSN USA, I've served as speaker at the 2021 Zero Emission Solutions Conference, which was held at the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, Scotland. But I'm a country girl at heart, and my work on sustainable development is informed by my early years in Mansfield, Ohio, which I met a colleague, actually, someone here from Mansfield, which was great to see. My story started on a humble 50-acre farm in Amish country in Ohio, where a little black girl grew up with two parents who made up for their lack of formal education with good sense, hard work, and a strong belief in education, God, the land, and civil rights. At the dinner table, we had two main selections: take it or leave it. On Sunday, we had one: church. I grew up happy, healthy, but curious. My father, James Bond, is a minister. I very much enjoyed what I heard of the last presentation. He emerged from a family of civil rights activists, from Julian Bond to Ollie Bond. Ollie and his family narrowly escaped their home being burned on Christmas Eve night in the late 1930s in Brownsville, Tennessee. Ollie and his wife had started the first branch of the NAACP in Brownsville, Tennessee. Ollie's daughter, Mildred Roxborough Bond, a retired leader in the NAACP, was eventually given the keys to the city, the same city that tried to burn her father's house down on Christmas Eve, was given the keys to the city in the 1990s by the mayor. So we do see progress. The full story was told in the 2000 edition of The Crisis. My work, like my talk today, is informed by this history and this perspective. And it's also informed that unifying strand that I made mention of before is a strong sense of justice and human rights. The title of my talk. The formal title, the published title, is The U.S. and the Sustainable Development Goals and the Future We Want. I want you to gain a couple things from this talk. First of all, to know what the Sustainable Development Goals are. I'm sure many of you may already know the SDGs. I also want you to know why they're important and why you should care, and also what we can do about it and what it means for the larger context. So what do we mean by sustainable development, and what does it have to do with the future? Let's start off by engaging in a thought experience. If you could wave a magic wand that would grant you any 3 wishes for the future, what would those 3 wishes be? What would that wave of the magic wand produce for you? What would you want? Would you wish for world peace, bigger paycheck, better working conditions, lower tuition rates for children and grandchildren? Would you wish for a cure of cancer, Alzheimer's, or just to be healthy, have access to decent health care? Or maybe you're wishing for your progeny to grow up in a world with less pollution, less intense and dangerous heat and storms, less poverty, less plastics, less microplastics, less plastics in oceans. Maybe you're wanting your children to grow up in a world in which you don't have to give your sons and daughters of color that talk or worry about being discriminated against or gun violence. Make a note of your 3 wishes. I'm going to refer to them as I go through the talk. But I can guarantee you, audience, one thing, that if not one, if not all 3 wishes are going to be related to one or more of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, that's part of what we call the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. I'm going to give you a little background on that. The 2030 Agenda was adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015. They replaced what you may recognize as the Millennium Development Goals, and they provide a shared blueprint for peace, prosperity for people, the planet, now and into the future. At the heart of this agenda are the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action by all countries, both developed and developing. And it goes hand in hand with other goals such as reducing inequality, spurring economic growth while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. Now let's find your 3 wishes. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals defined not only what I call the American dream, but the world dream, a decent standard of living worldwide, food on the table, a little savings in the bank. This is how I wrote in a piece that we published at SDSN USA called In the Red, a good job with a livable wage, clean water to drink, clean air to breathe, a good education and a decent job, schools, roads, transit systems, bridges, internet powered by renewable energies with, I call, a little culture on the side, fair treatment, equal opportunity, the right to vote. This is what the Sustainable Development Goals are at the heart: access to health care, opportunity to live a long life without dying in childbirth, ingesting lead, or getting shot. And finally, a chance to do as well or maybe even better than your parents. For example, Goal 1. I'm not going to read all through the goals, but just sort of summarize them for you. Find one of your 3 goals in the list of the 17 goals. Goal 1, end poverty. Now, there are more wide targets in which that substantiate the goals. Goal 2, end hunger. Goal 3, these are goals that all member states of the United Nations says, these are the things we need to have a thriving human race. Goal 3, ensure healthy lives, promote well-being. Goal 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education. I'm wedded to all the goals, but specifically to Goal 4 and others. Goal 5, achieve gender equity. Goal 6, ensure availability, sustainable management of water and sanitation. Lots of times people don't think we have trouble with that in the United States. That's not the case at all. I'm going to share with you today. Goal 7, ensure access to affordable modern energy, renewables. Goal 8, promote sustained, inclusive economic growth. Goal 10, reducing inequality within and among nations, countries, towns, cities, including the U.S. Goal 11, sometimes we call this the urban SDG, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, and resilient. Goal 12, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Goal 13, combat climate change. Goal 14, stay with me, conserve and sustainable use of our oceans, marine resources. Goal 15, restore, promote sustainable use of our ecosystems. Goal 16, very important goal. At one of the meetings that we had in the UN last year, we said without Goal 16, any of the other goals were just not achievable. Can you guess what that goal is? That's peace. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies. Goal 17, revitalize global partnerships to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. That's what they are in brief. So what do we mean by sustainable development? A lot of misunderstanding about that. Sustainable development is not just a buzzword. It's not just about climate change or the environment. It's about the 5 Ps. Can you guess what they are? People, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. I bet all, or at least 1, 2, or more of your 3 wishes definitely fit under one of those 5 Ps. People signifies a commitment to leave no one behind, no person, no group, no nation. Planet signifies the challenge of living within planetary boundaries. Prosperity signifies a commitment to extend the maternal benefits of modern education and technology to all parts of the world. Peace signifies a vital commitment by all nations in a nuclear age to live together, partnerships, the commitment to working together, and global progress overall. I just want to give you a minute to take that in. Each year, the United Nations, specifically, I chair the Sustainable Development Solutions Network with colleagues from Colombia. You might have known the name of Jeffrey Sachs and others that I work with. They work worldwide to put out a global SDG progress report. They rank nations along their progress toward achieving the 2030 agenda. So there's a ranking from 1 to 167. Sometimes I ask questions just for thought, and we can discuss later. Where do you think the United States ranks from 1 to 167? Who said 40? Getting pretty close. Let's look at the top 9. Let me ask you this. Who do you think ranks number 1? You'll get this. Number 1, meeting those 17 SDGs, number 1 in the nation. Who said Finland? Correct. Top 9 countries. Finland. Now, I'm a teacher. I'm an educator. I always think on a scale of 100. 90 to 100 is A. 80 to 90, that's how I think. So the top of the scale, we don't start at 90 to 100. We're starting at 86.4. Now, there are indicators we use to measure this, and you can look at the report and see how we actually do the methodology. Finland, 86.4. Sweden, 85.7. Denmark, Germany, France, Austria, Norway, Croatia, United Kingdom. Here are the 166, the last 2 countries. Central African Republic and South Sudan, largely because of the lack of peace and other human development indicators. So where is the U.S.? If you look at the report, SDR 2024 Sustainable Development Report, you'll find that Ukraine is number 44. We're only using data, though, from 2022 because of the crisis in Ukraine. But Ukraine is number 44. Thailand, which I just came back from just days ago, 74.7. The United States, 74.4. Argentina, 74.4. Take a look at that list. Take a look at the methodology. It's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. Now, what does that mean? So just bear with me. The 2024 SD Agenda score and rankings, similar to our previous editions, we do one every year. European countries, particularly the Nordic countries, rank at the top. Finland typically ranks first. And interesting, we also do a happiness report, and Finland, number 1 on the Sustainable Development, Human Development Report, also ranks number 1 on the happiness scale. I think that's interesting. Countries at the bottom of the SDG index ranking tend to be impacted by military conflicts, security issues, political and socioeconomic instability. Yemen, Somalia, Chad, Central African Republic, South Sudan. I've been through much of Africa. Really breaks my heart. At the global level, SDG progress, though, has stalled since 2020. Global SDG progress was already slowed because of what? COVID-19, pandemic, and other crises. And we, the SDSN, that's part of that affiliate of the UN's job, is to make predictions of whether we're going to meet our 2030 agenda. Right now, none of the 17 SDGs will be achieved by 2030. Let's dig a little bit deeper on that. To a great extent, sustainable development really is a long-term investment challenge. Jeffrey Sachs, Columbia University professor, talks about this in great deal. To achieve prosperity, and we are going to dig into the U.S., so stay with me. It depends often on the ability of nations to access financing for programs of public and private investment. To some degree, some tend to think of it as an investment agenda. I tend to think of it as a human rights agenda. It can be both, and it is both. On a global scale, the key problem is that most low-income countries and lower middle-income countries pay an inexorbitantly high cost for capital, much higher than paid by the high-income countries. As we all know, the poor always pay more. These countries need access to affordable long-term capital so that they can invest at scale to achieve their sustainable development objectives. So what about the United States? We do a ranking there as well. But we did a specific kind of ranking a few years ago. The title of that report is called In the Red, the U.S. Not meeting its goals, certainly for marginalized communities. Let me tell you a little bit about what we found about progress for meeting those 17 goals, where certainly one or more of your 3 wishes is somewhere embedded. So let's do a deeper dive in the U.S. to see how the SDGs are being implemented among marginalized groups. By using a key pillar of that 2030 agenda, it's commonly referred to as LNOB, leaving no one behind. It's the implementation arm of the SDGs. So what does it mean? It means that it compels us to focus on discrimination and inequalities and to measure and determine who is being left behind. We can't meet the goals if there's a substantial part of the population that's being left behind. And we also understand that many of the barriers people face in accessing services, resources, and equal opportunities are not simply accidents of fate or the individuals not progressing or a lack of availability of resources, which is generally the case, but rather the result of discriminatory laws, in addition to this, policies and social practices that leave particular groups behind. So, leave no one behind entails this part of the agenda, reaching the poorest of the poor, combating discrimination, looking at root causes, understanding that a major cause of people and nations of being left behind is persistent forms of discrimination, gender discrimination, and so forth. So what did we find? In the red, which you can assess online, the title of the report, the U.S. Failure to Deliver on a Promise of Racial Equality. What did we do? First of all, it's an interactive index and map that measures the achievement of the SDGs based on how well U.S. states are implementing these goals to least served racial groups. The index uses the SDGs as a measure to extend analysis beyond just singular issues or topic, to look at patterns, because patterns is what's key here, of inequality, to create a systemic picture of where we are, where we're going, and the racial inequality. The findings, they're very sobering, show that on average, SDG implementation, clean water, clean air, peace, hunger, poverty. The findings show that SDG implementation is highly unequal. White communities receive resources and services at a rate of approximately 3 times as non-white communities. These results suggest that the SDGs will not be achieved in the United States without significant progress to end racial inequality in the U.S., much as what we find when we look abroad. Achieving the SDGs for the world means really taking a look at countries that are being left behind. So what does this mean? First of all, this study is unique of its own. It's one of the first attempts to use the SDGs, these common goals nations have subscribed to assess the unequal delivery of sustainability in the U.S. And we base it on the transformative Leave No One Behind framework. SDSN USA reveals these disparities. We also highlight the numerous critical gaps. This is really key here. I could talk a lot more about it, about the availability of racially disaggregated data in officially public available U.S. sources to enable policymakers, researchers, and community leaders to collaborate and to address these inequalities. This project is accompanied by an online data visualization that displays the geographic distribution. You could access it online through the interactive maps. The results indicate that the delivery gap, as I said before, is deep and wide. Where do you think we found the biggest disparities? And I'll ask you about how we rank the states. Some of the biggest disparities appear, now again, this is the implementation of these goals, these wishes, among marginalized communities, indigenous, Hispanic, Black and brown communities. Largest disparities appear in education, employment, justice, and life expectancy. However, disparities were exposed across nearly all the 51 racially disaggregated indicators. Goals are big, but you have indicators that let you know whether you're achieving the goals, and you have targets when the larger goals. Okay, now we have a big picture. If these composites were represented by letter grades based on the grading scale that we all know as educators or children going through school, every state in the union would receive a grade of C. No, that's not accurate. Every state in the union would receive a failing grade of F for their performance toward achieving the 17 SDGs for Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, Asian, multiracial, and other communities. That's staggering. I did a talk at the UN just, 2 years ago. It just had come out, and a lady came up and was telling me about the impact of this report, that she actually teaches it at her university. I think she was at a community college. I was really heartened by that people were listening to that. So I want you, though, to consider the SDG grade card. Let's look at the grade card. No poverty. Remember that was SDG 1? How many of you, out of your one of 3 wishes in your magic wand, said to yourself that you'd like to envision a world with no poverty? How many of you? Okay. Most of us, that's what we envision for people, not because being in poverty is really a violation of human rights. It's a form of violence. No poverty SDG in the United States ranked as an F. Health and well-being, SDG 3F, quality education F, gender equality F. You can go online, you can go to the interactive map, you can click on an SDG, you can click on a state, and you can see how we determine these scores, which is key. You know, we use a number of indicators, and these indicators are suggesting these scores. And what we're doing now is to triangulate this, is to go back and use a different set of indicators a year or 2 later to see if we receive the same or similar scoring. And that will give us some sense that, you know, what we're doing is really reliable and really valid over time. Even access to decent work and economic growth, Goal 8, for Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Indigenous communities in the richest country in the world received a failing grade. South Dakota ranked the lowest out of 100, and Utah the highest in terms of economic growth. But I'm going to talk about how we rank the states. But this is, to me, I think, most particular concerning, and I am watching my time here. And let me know if I'm going over, because I do want to have time for us to talk. But for me, a particular concern is the low score states received for SDG 16. Does anyone remember what SDG 16 was? Peace, peace, okay. How many of you, by the way, said peace in your 1 to 3? Okay, very good, yeah. Most of us are always thinking in terms of peace, and that's good because we need peace to really see the goals. The promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies, and I'll tell you about how we arrived at this score, which is really important. Minnesota, the state where police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of the murder of George Floyd, has an overall score. Now imagine, you can get 100. You can get 100 on your test. You know, we want our kids somewhere between 90 and 100. Minnesota received a 4.1 out of 100 for SDG 16. Other states, such as South Dakota, scored even lower, 0.46, while 12 others get 0. Arkansas, Florida, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Nebraska, Nevada, Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas, and Wisconsin. Now, here's a limitation to our work. A significant barrier to evaluating the progress was the unavailability of racially disaggregated data across a variety of issue areas. So we had to sort of supplement and sometimes look at data at large. Racially disaggregated data is unavailable at the state level for a lot of different topics. such as food insecurity, maternal mortality, lead in drinking water, as well as for water, clean energy, and renewable consumption, especially at the state level, because this analysis is done at the state level. I'm shocked at why states would not want to collect that data, but we've put out a call for them to do that, although research indicates, for example, that clean water is also racially distributed depending on where you live. Existing racially disaggregated data is often not available for all groups, particularly for measures around environmental justice. So where do the U.S. states rank? Let's look at the rankings. States are ranked by their overall score, an average of scores of the 17 SDGs. Again, we're measuring progress of racially marginalized groups in comparison to the majority group. So keep that in mind. Again, their overall score measures the state's total progress toward achieving all 17 SDGs. A score of 100, as I said earlier, indicates that the SDGs have been achieved for all groups. What state do you think ranked the best and the worst? Let's start with the best. Someone said Massachusetts? Rhode Island? Iowa, I heard California. Vermont. Actually, some of those you're mentioning are really in the top 10. Number 1 ranked state is Hawaii. Now, as a teacher, I'm always thinking of 1 to 100, 80 to 100, 90 to 100, somewhere in that. You know, keep in mind that Hawaii, number 1, had a 45.60. That would be an F on most teachers' scale. Now, but what's important is to go and look at the indicators that we use to arrive at that. Okay, that's important. Let me give you the top 10, and I heard a lot of them. Hawaii, Oregon, Idaho. I think you're up there. We're going to wrap up. Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire, Washington, Colorado, Montana, Massachusetts. Let me give you the worst ranking states here, from 41 to 50. Arkansas, Wisconsin, Missouri, Alabama, West Virginia, Ohio, my home state, Illinois, Louisiana. 49 and 50 is Pennsylvania and Indiana. Wow. I think I'm probably out of time?
Yeah.
Okay, I thought, I actually timed it and it was like 35 minutes, but I think I added some pieces to that. But we can talk about the rest in the Q&A. Thank you, you've been a great audience. Look forward to your questions.